Rain lashed against the towering glass windows of a penthouse that kissed the clouds. Within, amidst the warmth of chandeliers and the scent of imported roses, Eleanor Sinclair sat in silence, watching the gray world below. She was one of the most powerful women in the country, a self-made billionaire, and of Sinclair Global, and a household name on the front covers of Forbes and Vogue. But none of her riches, her power, or her elegance could mend what truly mattered to her: her daughter Isabel. Isabel was born with cerebral palsy, and despite every treatment money could buy, her legs had never known the freedom of movement. For 8 years, Eleanor poured everything into finding a cure, a breakthrough, a miracle. She had traveled to Switzerland, Japan, Germany, Israel, consulted with world-class neurologists, orthopedists, and specialists in robotics and stem cell therapy. But the answer was always the same: it may improve, but she may never walk too. The world, Eleanor, was flawless, an emblem of triumph and ambition. But within, she was shattered, a mother, trapped in a palace of guilt and helplessness. Her wealth had come at a cost: endless hours away from her child, missed birthdays, and a fractured marriage. Her husband had walked out 5 years ago, unable to bear the burden or the emotional drain. Eleanor had been left alone to raise Isabel with an army of nannies, therapists, and consultants, none of whom could give the girl what she wanted most: not toys, not trips, not tutors. She wanted to walk. She wanted to dance. Meanwhile, not. Far from the towering skyline, in a dusty garage on the outskirts of town, a man named Marco Reyes wiped sweat from his brow, his hands stained with grease. He was a former robotics engineer turned automechanica man with brilliance buried beneath broken dreams. Life had been cruel to him, too. Once a rising star at an AI startup, Marco had left the tech world after a failed invention led to a lawsuit and the collapse of his reputation. Now he fixed clunkers and worn-down pickups to keep the lights on for himself and his younger sister, Camila, who had Down syndrome. But Marco never stopped tinkering. Behind the garage, in a shed filled with scrap and circuits, he'd been working on something extraordinary: an adaptive exoskeleton. He had been building it for years, using old parts, donated servos, smuggled algorithms he'd once written for a medical tech company. It was meant to give motion to those who had none: Camila, who had once struggled to walk without. Support had taken her first steps last summer, thanks to Marco's invention, but no one knew, no one cared. The world had forgotten Marco Reyes. To the elite, he was just another poor man with calloused hands and a broken resume. But to those who came to his shop, he was a genius in disguise, a humble savior for old engines and tired hearts. The day Eleanor's rolls Royce broke down on the edge of Eastbridge was the day fate began to write its story. She was on her way to yet another appointment, a private clinic in the hills, where a new specialist from Norway claimed he had pioneered a neuromuscular stimulation technique. She had Isabel in the back, wrapped in a pink blanket, head resting quietly against the window. The girl rarely smiled anymore. Her world was a silent battle between hope and disappointment. When the car jolted to a stop with a hiss and a whine, Eleanor cursed beneath her breath. Her driver panicked. They were far from the city center, and the rain wasn't letting up. That's when Marco, on his lunch break, saw the stalled car. Without hesitation, he approached. Eleanor watched him through the tinted window, a man soaked in oil and sweat, with a face that didn't know defeat. She nearly rolled the window back up. But then he knocked politely and offered to help. At first, she dismissed him. "We've already called someone," she said sharply. Marco simply nodded. "No problem, ma'am. Just wanted to help." As he turned to walk away, something in Isabel stirred. "Mom," she said weakly, her voice rare and brittle. "He looks nice." Eleanor paused. 5 minutes later, Marco had the hood open. He worked in silence, his movements precise, mechanical, almost artistic. In 10 minutes, the engine purred again. Eleanor offered him money, crisp bills in an envelope she pulled from her bag. Marco shook his head. "I'm not taking that." He said, "Why not? You're a mother, and you were stuck." "That's enough." Isabel's eyes widened. "Thank you," she whispered from the back. Marco smiled. That could have been the end. But something tugged at Eleanor. Strange feeling. She hadn't known in years curiosity. Do you have a card? Marco pulled a crumpled flyer from his back pocket. Marco's garage. We fix cars. And other things, it read. Eleanor took it. What other things? She asked, half mocking. Broken stuff, Marco said. And people, sometimes. That night, Eleanor Googled him, what she found surprised. Her articles from 10 years ago about a Latino tech prodigy. Patents with his name on them, interviews from TEDx and innovation panels. Then, nothing, like a light had gone out. She found no criminal record, no scandals, only the echo of a man who had vanished. The next week, she returned. Not in her roles, just her and Isabel in a rented SUV. Marco was working on a junked Impala. When she arrived, you said you fix people, she said. Can you fix her? Marco looked at Isabel, then at Eleanor. She's not broken, Eleanor blinked, but she can't walk. That doesn't mean she's broken. Isabel looked at him with new eyes. Marco gestured for them to follow him to the back of the shop. Inside, behind a curtain of metal and wires, was a prototype that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi Moeya mechanical frame shaped to fit. Around human legs, complete with gyroscopic joints and pressure-sensitive feet. This is hope, he said. I built it for my sister. Eleanor was speechless. Marco continued. I've never had a test subject outside of her. But if your daughter wants to try, Isabel's voice was clear. I do. Eleanor's eyes welled up. She'd written checks for $100 million. She had met with the top experts on 5 continents. And here, in a dusty garage, poor mechanic was offering her daughter a chance to walk not for profit, not for fame, but because he believed in fixing what others abandoned. As Isabel stood for the first time, assisted by the suit, wobbling, trembling, but upright, Eleanor collapsed into tears. Not the composed tears of a corporate warrior, but the sobbing of a mother who had witnessed the impossible. The news of Isabel's first step spread like wildfire, but not through tabloids or press releases. It moved quietly like a warm wind through cold hearts via whispers among nannies, drivers, and hospital corridors. Eleanor had not told a soul beyond her inner circle, not yet. She didn't want the world to spin it into a headline. She wanted to preserve the purity of that moment in the garage, where for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a billionaire or a public figure. She felt like a mother whose daughter had just touched a miracle. She visited Marco's garage daily after that, sometimes with Isabel, sometimes alone. She wanted to understand the man behind the machine, the quiet genius who had vanished from the spotlight. She brought questions, coffee, and curiosity. What she found was a man whose mind operated like a machine and a poet at once. Marco explained biomechanics, neural feedback loops, and adaptive torque systems, but also spoke of human resilience, of belief, and of how real engineering wasn't about metal and code, but heart and trust. The suit he built wasn't just a tool, it was a bridge between impossibility and hope. Meanwhile, Isabel improved faster than anyone imagined. Her body, once bound by fear and stiffness, began to respond lowly, painfully, but undeniably. Each step was a battle, each fall a lesson, but Marco never let her quit. He treated her like an equal, not a fragile doll. He challenged her with kindness and encouraged her with truth. Eleanor watched in awe as her daughter, once a quiet, withdrawn child, began to glow from within. Her laughter returned, her voice stronger, her gaze braver. Something else stirred too, within Eleanor, a sense of peace, fulfillment, gratitude. And for the first time in years, she began to smile without effort. But the world, with all its noise and cynicism, would not stay quiet for long. One afternoon, a Sinclair executive visited the garage. Vanessa Cordell, Eleanor's chua, brilliant but cold woman who had grown nervous about Eleanor's increasing absence from boardrooms. Vanessa didn't trust Bacali mechanics and had grown suspicious of Eleanor's private experiments. When she saw the exoskeleton, she smirked. So this is where our CEO is hiding, she sneered, playing savior with scrap metal. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. This scrap metal gave my daughter her first steps. Show some respect. Vanessa crossed her arms. With all due respect, we can't afford distractions. The board is asking questions. You're missing meetings. Investors are restless. And now, you're trusting our family legacy to a man with a failed tech history? Marco stood still, unfazed. I'm not looking for your approval, he said calmly. Just results. But Vanessa was relentless. She dug into Marco's past, found the lawsuit, the failed startup, the bankruptcy, the sealed court documents. She warned Eleanor that if this got out, it could spark scandal. Imagine the headlines, she hissed. Billionaire entrusts disabled child to disgraced inventor in unsanitary conditions. The media would devour you. Eleanor was torn. For the first time, fear crept back and not for herself. But for Isabel and Marco, could their fragile hope survive public scrutiny? That night, she invited Marco and Camila to her penthouse for dinner. The stark contrast between thigh